is underemployment. And by underemployment, I mean students graduating from their formal education. Normally I talk to colleges and universities. So graduating with a degree, either an associate's or a bachelor's degree, and getting a job. Their first job is a job that they probably could have gotten anyway without all the investment of time and debt in that degree. The classic example is the liberal arts graduate who's working at Starbucks, although of course now with COVID, they may not even have that job at Starbucks. Underemployment was already bad pre-COVID. Almost half of all new college grads were graduating into underemployment. And we know that if you're underemployed in your first job after your formal education, it's persistent. 2/3 of the time you're underemployed 5 years later, half the time you're underemployed a decade later. So it really, really matters. Student loan debt is also is a contributor to underemployment. In part, students are taking kind of the first jobs they can find that allow them to pay off their loans. Debt limits flexibility with regard to the job search and contributes to underemployment. So it's a lot of the attention, the public attention on these issues really comes in the affordability area, focusing on the student loan crisis, the crisis of student debt, and that's a real issue. But employment and underemployment is the flip side of that, if you will, because if everyone graduated into a $60,000 a year job, they'd have no trouble paying off $40,000 of student loans. So that's why we're talking about this. And if you look at sort of the path that millennials have trod, the group that's really graduated, into and from the Great Recession, they've fallen behind prior generations on virtually every economic metric: wealth, income, housing, new business creation. They've fallen behind. And with COVID, what you have now is you have this sort of tail end of the millennial generation following in the footsteps of their older brothers and sisters who graduated sort of out of the Great Recession. So it's a real problem. So that's why I say the most significant change in education and higher education today is that, if you'd surveyed people who were matriculating into a college program 20 years ago, and you'd ask them why they were doing it, only about half would have given you the answer of job or career or income or first job. And today, when you ask that question, it's consistently north of 90% are saying that's why they're doing it. This is something I like talking about. There are lots of sort of pundits on the future of education who consistently talk about how technology is dramatically changing education, and I think and particularly this year with sort of everyone learning remotely, it seems as though technology has completely transformed the landscape. But in reality, what I think we're going to find once we return to more of a normal environment is that technology isn't changing higher education directly, but it's changing it in an indirect way, because what technology has done is change the demand from employers significantly. If you look at what an entry-level job is today in the workforce versus what it was 20 years ago, it's dramatically different. We're going to talk about what those differences are. And the other way is that it's by digitizing hiring, the hiring process has completely changed. So technology is not changing education directly, but rather indirectly by changing the demand for what education produces, which is trained workers ready to be productive in a job. In one way, in terms of the hiring process, is that if you look at entry-level jobs across virtually all industries, and you look and map what kinds of skills are specified in those job descriptions, we are seeing a proliferation of digital or technical skills in those job descriptions, increasing year to year over the last 20 years, to the point that across virtually in every economic sector, technical skills now outnumber all other skills combined in these job descriptions. So that's an important factor. What are these technical skills? Coding is the one that I think most people would name, but really, when you boil down to it, most entry-level jobs are best described as you're working for an enterprise or an organization, and you're using one or more software platforms or SaaS platforms to manage a business function. And unless our formal education system begins training on the software platforms that they're using and on the businesses, you're going to find that we continue to have this gap between what our schools are producing and what employers are seeking. A lot of the time you have educational institutions that say, well, we don't need to train young people on these digital skills, on these software platforms, because they're digital natives. They've grown up with iPhones and they know how to use Netflix, but there's a huge difference between knowing how to use Spotify or your iPhone versus being competent on the Epic electronic medical record system, which has 50 modules and requires hundreds of hours of training to be competent on it, and probably also requires some knowledge of how the healthcare system actually works. So those are the things that employers are seeking but not finding, and that our education system is not producing. Another good example is the Salesforce platform. There are nearly 1 million unfilled Salesforce jobs in the US, jobs that are asking for some experience with the Salesforce platform. 5 million jobs going to be created in the next 5 years on Salesforce. I was speaking a while back to an audience of college and university presidents, and I asked them, how many of your institutions, raise your hand if you provide any training at all on the Salesforce platform? Not one hand went up in the room. And so that's a problem. That's a problem. So, the gap has grown because as the technical needs of American enterprise and employers have increased, colleges and universities have not kept up for the most part. They have launched new programs. Those programs take years to develop. This was an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education a few years ago about a new cybersecurity degree program launched by Texas A&M. But the author then went ahead and it was a mostly laudatory article, but then went on to ask this question, but isn't this a trap? Because aren't these skills going to be obsolete 5 or 10 years from now? But I think what's interesting here is that question is really only asked in the education industry, right? What other sector of the economy would say, well, let's not develop this new product or service because it might be obsolete in 5 or 10 years. That doesn't happen in technology, it doesn't happen in healthcare. You develop that product and service and you adapt it, you modify it if it's going to become obsolete, but you don't not develop it, or you don't even ask the question. So I think it's a good indication of sort of what the mindset is in our sector, and it's a mindset that needs to change. So I talked about the hiring process as being a factor here in this gap. The fact is that with all good jobs that your graduates are looking for posted online, and the ease of applying to a job that's posted online, every online job posting generates hundreds of applications, 400, 500 applications, typically minimum. And employers aren't looking at each of those applicants. They're not sorting through 400 or 500 resumes for each job posting. What they're doing is using applicant tracking systems, which are keyword-based filters, to determine which 20 or 30 applicants they should even look at. And those applicant-based filters are based on keywords. The keywords, as I mentioned before, are primarily technical. Now, they're looking for technical skills. So if you don't have Salesforce or Epic on your resume, you're not even going to be considered, because you'll be invisible to the hiring manager. They just simply won't see you because you don't have the requisite density of keywords. So all of this gap gave rise to the book that Matt kindly referenced earlier, which came out 2 years ago. The idea is that, we need to rethink pathways to a good first job. And we need to rethink them outside of the traditional institutional or accredited or academic structure, primarily because the jobs that are on offer and that our graduates aren't getting are jobs that require combinations of technical and business skills, along with some soft skills. There have to be, one would think, that we could put together faster and cheaper pathways to getting those jobs. And that's sort of links into the unbundling of the 4-year or 2-year degree into something shorter and more efficient and more cost effective, and having a higher return on investment for the student. And of course, with COVID, the situation just got materially worse. There's lots of employers now that are just simply not hiring because these new workers would have to work remotely and who are not set up for remote hiring and remote onboarding as well. So, obviously 10 million workers who were working before COVID who are no longer working. So it's even worse. It's even worse than that. So broadly speaking, we think that this skills gap, the gap between what our education system is producing and what employers are seeking, is at the root of a lot of the problems that we're seeing in American society today. If we had more and better pathways to opportunity, if our education system were still an engine of socioeconomic mobility rather than a brake on socioeconomic mobility, is something it's become, we wouldn't have much of the tension that we're seeing in the country. We think that if you think about sort of the causes of this gap, you really have to think in sort of two parts. One is the student side, and the other is the employer side. So on the student side, why doesn't everyone just go out and get these technical, digital, and business skills that employers are seeking? We call this education friction, and it's primarily the cost of upskilling as well as the uncertainty of the employment outcome. If you could wave a magic wand and eliminate the cost and eliminate the uncertainty, guarantee them a job, you'd have tens of millions of people going out and getting these skills. On the other side, on the employer side, we have the problem we call hiring friction, which is the reduced propensity of employers to hire candidates into these roles where the candidates don't check every box. So essentially what this is employers just getting pickier and pickier. So for example, entry-level sales jobs 20 years ago, they'd hire you if you had a degree and you had a pulse in some of these jobs. And now many of those jobs ask for 2 years of experience with a Salesforce platform. So entry-level jobs in some cases have become an oxymoron because, well, how do you get that Salesforce experience? I can't get it at school. No one's teaching it. I can't get it without experience. No one's going to hire me because I don't have experience. So this idea of last mile training, it's really the combination of digital training with business knowledge as well built in, with plus soft skills training, obviously derived from that concept of the last mile to the home, which is the hardest and the most expensive to build, but the most valuable segment of the pipe. And another way to think of this is we're really sort of designing backwards. We're designing from the objective, which is a good first job. And I've talked to other charter school organizations. I think I mentioned to Matt when we first met that there are other charter school organizations out there that are looking at the outcomes of their graduates and have previously adopted a kind of college for all mentality. But if you look at how their students are actually performing in terms of persistence at college, graduation from college, and then attainment of a good first job, the numbers are poor for lots of schools. And so there has to be a better way to do this by perhaps building backwards or building from right to left as opposed to left to right. The elements of last mile training, you're focusing on discrete technical skills. Some would say tech stacks, some would say specific software platforms that are used in these jobs. They're intensive. Before COVID, they were immersive. Hopefully after COVID, we can get back to being in a physical immersive environment, because it's not just about the technical skills. It's also about the soft skills, which are really hard to train in a virtual space. So you really want, and the idea is that it looks more like a workspace than it does like a school. You're collaborating on real projects with fellow students or apprentices, as we tend to call them, and they are accountable to each other and accountable to the client or the employer for the end result. And if you ask them what credential they're getting from the experience, they're most likely to say something like, the credential is the job. It's the job. It's, that's what this is about. So we've seen and in my book, I chronicle sort of the evolution of these last mile programs and what they allow, which is sort of an upending of the traditional education value proposition to one we've always sort of all been in that bottom left corner. I'm speaking primarily from the standpoint of post-secondary education, but that bottom left corner is you pay tuition, you pay your money up front, you take your chances. There's no guaranteed employment outcome. So what these last mile programs allow are these other quadrants that are a superior value proposition to the student. Maybe you're paying, but you're being guaranteed a job, or maybe you're not paying at all, or maybe you have the best of both worlds where you're earning while you're learning. So a lot of the work that we do, as Matt knows, is related to apprenticeships and building apprenticeship models. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but suffice it to say that they're very popular, and there's a huge amount of political support across the spectrum for building apprenticeships and expanding them outside of the traditional blue-collar construction trades, which is where they continue to be there. But 5 million apprentices in the US, but all of them, virtually all of them, are still sort of in those traditional blue-collar building and construction trades. So how do we build out apprenticeships in tech, in financial services, in healthcare? Because apprenticeships work. And the hard part with apprenticeships is getting that employer engagement, figuring out how to do that, because employers have better things to do than babysit apprentices and fund apprenticeship training and pay their salaries while they're learning. And as evidence of that, there are still 7 million unfilled jobs out there in the U.S. So employers are going to probably fill those jobs first before they begin investing in apprentices, in apprenticeship programs. Just a few other notes before we get to the discussion. What else can schools do to help bridge this gap to employment? One is digital credentials. So badges begin offering portable credentials for specific skills, specific attainment that candidates can put on LinkedIn, can put on their Facebook, and make visible to employers. So we can have a discussion around that. A second is work integrated learning, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but this is a digital platform that connects employers and specific projects that employers might have on offer with schools, primarily post-secondary institutions, but they have some K-12 institutions as well, and making those projects available to students so students can get real work experience as part of a program of study or even a specific course. And then obviously career discovery, more career discovery at the middle and high school level to help students ascertain which last mile pathway they might want to pursue, because obviously the traditional college model allows students to defer that decision making. The idea of the last mile is they're going to need to make a decision early on, but it's not going to be a life-changing decision or one they won't be able to come back from if they've made a bad decision, because hopefully it's one where they're not incurring any financial risk, they're not taking on any debt, and they're earning a valuable credential or an industry recognized credential in the market. So let me stop there and stop sharing, and then throw it open to Matt or whoever's going to moderate.
Ryan, I don't know if it's Zoom etiquette, but if we're in person, we would give you a big round of applause. So thank you very, very much.
Sorry, I tried to do that in the requisite time. It was a little bit scattered. But...
You were great. So we wanted to make sure, and we front loaded you 3 questions. I'll read off real quickly, but if people want to throw questions in the chat, and then once you address these 3, maybe we can open it up for people to ask you, and you can hear directly from them. But, you know, as we launch off into this new world for us, what training programs, last mile training certifications do you recommend we consider? I think you really touched upon some in your talk. What information, like for example, existing corporate partnerships, do you need in advance? Oh, sorry. Second question, what recommendations would you have? And Dr. K surfaced this in the chat. Would you build your own, or would you curate other great programs? So let me just stop with that, and we'll come back to the third one.
Look, this is the first thing to understand is that no one has done this before at the K-12 level, as far as I'm aware. And so there's not a right answer or a clear path to trod here. This is going to be trial and error to figure out what works. But I think the important thing is to recognize the skills that are in demand in the market and that aren't being addressed. And that doesn't mean sort of national level. I mean, it's irrelevant. You're in LA, and there's labor market information available for LA, and you know it's probably a good idea to try to access that information via platforms like MC or Burning Glass to get that local labor market information and understand where the gaps are. And I would focus specifically start on those technical skills, technical platforms where you're seeing jobs that are listed and the specific tech skills for those jobs that are open and staying open. The second filter is, of course, they need to be entry level, and not just entry level, but they need to be jobs that, you know, an 18-year-old might conceivably be qualified for, and that's difficult. And I don't know sort of any labor market analytics firm that has done that, but I'd certainly be happy to connect you with the folks at Burning Glass or MC or one of the other firms to see whether that might be something that they could do or help you with on a pro bono basis. But I think, you know, hopefully what you'll find is that there are thousands of jobs that are in that category where you have discrete tech platforms, software platforms, tech stacks that are clearly in demand and where those jobs are not being filled right now. And so that's where I would start in terms of the curriculum development. It needs to be employer driven, but you know, rather than getting a handful of specific employers around the table and asking them what they have on offer, it probably does make sense to look broadly at the market and get that labor market information, because it is available to do that. The next question is develop your own curriculum or not, and I would say probably under no circumstance should you develop it completely. Because there are a range, as Sabrina mentioned in the chat. Salesforce has its Trailhead programs. Amazon has its AWS Academy programs. There are lots of these tech stacks, tech platforms that recognize that one of the major impediments to their own growth is access to trained talent for their clients, and have invested in training curricula in order to address that. So I think you definitely want to start there with what these platforms have put out there. But the idea that somehow the solution is simply online asynchronous content that your students are going to make it through. Obviously, you know enough about your population to know that's not going to work. So that becomes a resource or perhaps an organizing principle for the course, but it's going to be your instructors who are going to have to build curriculum around that sort of off-the-shelf curriculum that the platforms are providing themselves. The third part, obviously, is employer engagement. And you've already, I think it looks like you've already got a head start there with the initial conversations that have led to the inclusion of these few or these like 6 or 8 employers in the grant application, and that's terrific. But the question is, how do you leverage those individual points of contact into a deeper, more meaningful relationship? This is the hardest part because I guarantee you that the individuals that you've already spoken with are not the ones making hiring decisions for their organizations. And they may not even be the ones that have their finger on the pulse of what the hiring or skill needs are for those organizations. So that is the hard part, and frankly, a reason why we're pushing the models that we're pushing, which is we're building intermediaries that essentially take all the risk out of the equation for the employer by acting as the employer of record for a period of time, allowing Boeing and so forth to try the talent before they have to buy the talent, which is probably not something that you're positioned to do or funded to do, for at least for the foreseeable future. Although I will say that I was advising the California Community College system on the launch of their new online program, CalBright, and this was something that the CalBright wanted to do. They were going to into their new last mile cybersecurity program. They wanted to be able to say to candidates that if you complete this cybersecurity certificate program, we guarantee you a job because we will hire you through our foundation. Our foundation will act as the employer of record for a period of time, and we will take the risk for you. And when you do that, obviously, you're going to get better talent in the top of the funnel, and that's just going to create a virtuous circle for the whole program. You get better talent in the front, you get better clients, you get more client interest, and it just sort of feeds on itself. So hard to do as an educational institution, as a school, because you're really not set up to do that, to sort of serve as the employer. At the end of the day, really all we can do is I say this I don't mean to say this derisively, but kind of train and pray, right? That is sort of the model that we can do. We can be as well-intentioned about it as possible. We can be as thoughtful as possible about the training, but ultimately we're going to provide what we think is the most in-demand training out there, and we can provide support and mentoring and coaching and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's really going to be up to that student or that graduate to land that first job. So that's the hard part of the model. But so let me stop there and see what questions you have.
Ryan, there's 2 questions in there. One from a key leader at El Camino College, and then one from a guy in charge of mission control for SpaceX. So take a look at those questions. I can read them out loud if it's hard to navigate.
Sorry, is it Colleen?
So Dr. Maldonado said, one of the goals of a K-14 Career Pathways partnerships, this grant that you read, thank you, between K-12 and community colleges is workforce readiness, certifications, and digital badges. How can we integrate last mile programs into existing pathways? We need to catch you up on what our existing pathways are. And is there a structure that you would recommend, or is this totally build your own? You've touched on pieces of that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think if this is the question from the community college, there are, AWS, Trailhead, Pathstream. They're all organizations that are willing to partner with you to help you build that. In fact, I was talking to someone at Amazon last week, and her job is literally to reach out to individual faculty or academic programs at 4-year and 2-year colleges and advise them on how they can actually adjust or amend their existing curricula in order to incorporate sort of AWS, the sort of cloudifying.
Yeah.
That's the term she uses. How do we cloudify our curriculum?
I was thinking, Ryan, this is Colleen. We have a cloud computing career pathway at El Camino. It's one of our open pathways, meaning it's open to all our school districts, but it might be serve as a model for what you're talking about here, in that we have obviously dual enrollment college classes in cloud computing, but as part of those classes, they've integrated the AWS certifications, the actual industry certifications that are required for jobs in that field. And so they're kind of paired together. And so at the same time, Amazon, they've already got this whole program set up. We've been able to give scholarships and things to help the students pay for the certifications, because normally that's something you do on your own, provided trainings before students take those tests and everything, make sure they're prepared for the certifications and things. So it may be a model that might work for other pathways and other pathways that Da Vinci has in terms of figuring out what are the digital software platforms or other things that go into that career area. So it seems like what we're doing with cloud computing sounds very similar to what you're talking about here.
Yep. No, agreed. That sounds like you've already cloudified that.
Ryan, another question from Nick from SpaceX, which he may or may not hear you, since it looks like he had to walk away from.
Sure. No, I can read it. Yeah.
Okay.
Limitations to this general philosophy. Yeah. I mean, I talk about that in my book. There are lots of downsides to this. We're not advocating for less post-secondary. We're not advocating. It might sound like we're saying nobody needs a degree anymore. Everyone should just, take the fastest pathway possible to a good first job and be done with it. And far from it. I mean, I think what we're talking about here is not less education per student, but rather restaging how we consume our education from what all you can eat in one sitting to what we need when we need it. And increasingly what we need when we need it for a good first job, to get your foot on the first rung of a career ladder with some economic security and no debt, is a combination of sort of digital skills, business knowledge, and soft skills. And once you get that, hopefully you'll be able to, after a few years, look around and ascertain what secondary or tertiary pathway you'll be able to pursue in order to gain those cognitive skills that are ostensibly developed today over the course of an undergraduate education: critical thinking, problem solving, communication skills, executive function skills, and so forth. The problem is that those secondary, tertiary pathways don't exist yet. So I'm confident post-secondary institutions will build them once tens and hundreds of millions of students are opting for these faster and cheaper pathways to good first jobs, because there will be a demand for them, and in all likelihood, those programs probably will be online. In all likelihood, I do sort of think that the last mile, the gap between secondary education and a good first job, that gap can really only be filled in a immersive physical environment. Everyone who's saying that the future of secondary and post-secondary education is online, I think they're wrong. I think that online is the answer for those who already have their foot on the first rung firmly of a career ladder and need to upskill and travel from there. Online is probably the answer for those individuals who already have the requisite sort of motivation, aptitude, and preparation in order to learn effectively in what is probably a primarily asynchronous online environment. But for the rest, and for your students, certainly it needs to be immersive, in person, and obviously highly work relevant, work integrated with the in-demand skills that employers are seeking but not finding for what should be entry-level jobs.
We have about 3 or 4 more minutes for other questions, if anyone else has one.
I have a question. We've been talking about the technology sector and the skills that they are or individuals may not have in order to enter that sector. And what I was wondering is that, you know, other sectors such as construction and other, you know, sectors that may have been deemed as blue collar,
Right.
what technical skills that they're requiring now, and also which of those skills that we can actually train our students to give them that option, because as we know, every student isn't, you know, all into IT. So
Yeah, I mean, virtually every job is sort of outside of the, you know, construction is, you know, there are construction jobs where you're not actually building necessarily, or building, spending all your time on the job site, but you're spending some of your time, part of your time behind a screen, helping to plan, supply chain, whatever it might be. And those jobs do have specific software platforms, SaaS platforms that are required to understand. And so, you know, I think on the one hand, you have your traditional trades where, you know, and I feel like the apprenticeship system for those trades is pretty well established. And those, you know, those trades, we're not seeing, you know, double-digit job growth in those jobs. There are open jobs, obviously, so I don't mean to diminish their importance. I think they're great jobs, and you probably have students who are headed in that direction. They'll make, you know, find great careers doing that. But I think that sort of if you're looking for where the job growth is, it's going to be in fields where you're using technology to do something else. It could be financial services, it could be insurance, it could be manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. But there are all of these jobs are using and interacting with some kind of combination of software and screen that those employers use, in some cases use you know, very specific, unique constellations of those technologies that may only exist at that one employer. But believe it or not, those employers are going to put all those all those platforms and technologies into that job description. So, which is why, you know, it's really hard for entry level sort of new graduates to break in and get those jobs. But the more of those platforms you're able to train on, the easier it is for the candidate to get the job, and for the employer to perhaps be a little more flexible on their job description. So I would say that you still want to look at what the specific technologies are that are used in those jobs, the specific platforms.
I think we have time for one more if we hold true to our commitment to you, Ryan. So. Nick, Ryan answered your question beautifully and you missed it.
Oh, apologize. That's great.
No. We know you have a day job. Any other thoughts or questions?
Well, as you proceed down this road, it's an adventure, and like I said, no one's done it before, so you're all pioneers. You know, pioneers get the arrows, but hopefully they also sometimes get the gold. So I wish you all the best as you pursue this, but it's critically important. I mean, you know, you can imagine if you're successful, and then dozens of others behind you will be successful, and we'll have new pathways, thousands of new pathways to good first jobs for the students who need them most, and the economic security. And really what you're doing is you're renewing the American dream, because right now it's broken. So the work you're doing is so important.
Ryan, this is Don Brand. I'm chairman of the board and founder of DaVinci. I enjoyed your book. Thank you very much. I expect when you do your next book, there might be a section in there about DaVinci.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely. Like I said, the last week, you know, it's serendipity of already had 2 conversations from charter schools that are interested in doing this. I think that's where the innovation is gonna come from. I frankly think it's the traditional 4 and 2-year schools, there are too many barriers to building pathways like this at scale, but it's clearly in your interest, in the interest of your students, to do it if you can. Not easy, it's not going to be easy to get the attention of the employers you want to partner with here, but you know, you're fighting the good fight. This is worth doing.
Ryan, Cindy asked that question. Do you mind sharing the other charter schools? We might talk to them. Do you remember their names?
I will need to get their permission probably to do that.
Understood. Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well,
Thank you.
thank you again so very, very much.
No, it's an honor. Best of luck to all of you. And Matt, please feel free to follow up if there's anything else I can do.